So having ADHD sucks. And if you're watching this, you probably already know that. But I would argue that having ADHD and not even knowing that you have ADHD is infinitely worse. As someone who didn't get diagnosed with ADHD until my early 30s, it does kind of sting to look back and think about how, you know, my best decade, not that I actually believe those things, but yeah, my 20s and therefore my life could have gone very differently if I had any idea what was going on with my brain. So today we're going to talk about it. If you're in your 30s and beyond, you might recognize some of these situations. And if you're in your 20s, maybe you can catch some of this stuff before it's too late. So let's talk about it. But to talk about my 20s, I think we first have to talk about the teenage years, because that is where the cracks first started to show, if you ask me. Because yeah, there's no way I would have been diagnosed as a child. I did tend to daydream a lot and like doodle on my notes in class and stuff, but I did very well in school. I got straight A's, and like most young women, I was very well behaved. And to be honest, high school wasn't too different. The work was still relatively easy for me, even with very little effort. And let it be known, I was putting in very little effort. And that's not to brag, mind you, just it becomes important later. But yeah, I was still living at home. So I generally, you know, I had food, I had a roof over my head, I had a schedule to stick to, and I didn't really have a lot of choice in anything, in a good way, I guess. But this is the thing. This is also the time that I probably should have been learning about adult things. And I was not learning about adult things. Okay, quick sidebar about my family history. Won't bore you with the details, but you know, my parents split up when I was young and they both remarried. And for most of my teenage years, I lived with the parent that I believe I inherited the ADHD from. Though, as you can imagine, they didn't know that they had it. I guess technically they still don't, but like, I'd put good money on it, you know what I'm saying? But anyway, so I don't want to blame them. But what I will say is that like there was no way for me to learn about things like emotional regulation and financial responsibility and self-care and things like that. You know, good self-care habits like cooking and doing laundry and things, because they weren't successfully doing those things themselves. If you're picking up what I'm putting down, you know, I think it's hard enough to become a young adult and get kicked out of the nest with all those like life skills, let alone without them. So long story short, I found myself at 18. I was living in an apartment with my best friend. I was having a blast. Not going to pretend that wasn't happening. But I also was existing on like frozen corn dogs and like pizza pockets. You know what I mean? Like it was bad. I couldn't cook, and I didn't even really realize how necessary that was, because eating like that was very common when I was growing up. And so I think some part of me probably was afraid to try, but I just didn't know. You just don't know what you don't know. You know what I'm saying? And also, I had made the choice to not go to college. Or more accurately, sure, like I was getting good grades and everything, but I had missed all the application deadlines for any college I was remotely interested in, because I just like didn't keep track of that stuff or think about the future in any real way, which again, I just thought was like a personal flaw, not like an ADHD thing, but let me not get ahead of myself. And to be honest, at the time, I thought it was fine because I was so indecisive. I didn't know exactly where I wanted to go to school. And it's not like there was money set aside for it anyway. And even if I could choose a school, I didn't really know what I wanted to study because I wanted to do 500 different things with my life. So I took a gap year. Now, this isn't my ADHD's fault, but it just so happened to be that gap year was 2008. And there was this thing called the recession going on. And so, you know, maybe you've heard of it. I had made my way to Vegas at that time. I was working for a timeshare company, but I got laid off. And when I went looking for work after that layoff, I tried like retail jobs, I tried the mall, I tried my local Taco Bell, okay, nada. And because I found myself in this predicament and I was low-key kind of desperate, I ended up joining the Air Force. That wasn't the only deciding factor, I guess. Also, my best friend at the time, the one I was living with, she told me she didn't think I could do it, and that made me want to prove her wrong. That's another story for another time. But my line of thinking was this, all right, I'm going to do a 6-year enlistment. I'm going to have 6 years of like security, stability, whatever. And in the meantime, you know, like I said, I didn't know if I wanted to study film, fashion, journalism, everything under the sun. I'm sure I'll figure it out by then. By the time I get out, 6 years from now, spoiler alert, I will not. I don't think that ADHD urge to pivot every 2 weeks, like ever actually goes away, but we won't talk about that right now. Now, I will say this. Unbeknownst to me at the time, my enlistment ended up being like one of the best things I've ever done for myself. Like 2 of my best friends to this day I met because of that. You know, I got to travel. My job was as a broadcaster, which is actually how I learned how to edit videos. And then when I got out, you know, I had the GI Bill to use, which was awesome. So it ended up being really good for me mostly, but it was a double-edged sword for sure. And let me tell you why. Because now it was this weird combination of like, okay, now I'm in the workforce where I'm expected to manage myself, even though I am like not well equipped to do so, but I don't even realize that just yet. And I'm going to start failing for the first time, and I'm not going to know how to deal with it or how to feel about myself as a person. Because you remember how I said I did really well in school without even having to try? Yeah, that did not fly at my job. And so yeah, I quickly went from feeling like this smart, talented person who could pull off anything. Like I'm telling you, I would procrastinate till on like a huge project, it's not start it till the night before and like still get an A. So I thought I could do anything. Bad news, that doesn't apply to like everything in life, okay? But anyway, yeah, I stopped feeling like I could handle anything and I started feeling like a complete shitbag because I cared, but I struggled with things like task initiation, time management, organization, staying focused. And also, this was the first time in my life where I was like chained to a desk for 8 hours a day. You know what I mean? Even in school, when you're in high school, at least you get to like switch things every hour. So I just felt like I was like in a cage for the first time, which I know sounds really dramatic. I think that's hard for humans in general, but probably much harder for humans with ADHD. You know what I'm saying? And yeah, I couldn't do anything about it. I was in this 6-year contract that like, well, you know how that is. You can't just quit. You can't like just change anything. And I had great bosses and great coworkers and tons of reasons to feel really grateful, but none of that mattered because I had to do this work no matter how much I struggled with it. So it got to the point where I started staying at work 12 hours a day, 14 hours a day, just dragging myself through work that I had started to hate, which again, I know it sounds kind of dramatic, but that was just my emotional reality at the time. And the way that I coped with those intense emotions, not to mention how exhausted I made myself, was food. Now, if you recall, I still don't know how to cook. Not that that mattered to me because the junk was the point. At the worst of it, there was this period of time where I would remember like leaving the office. I'd drive over to the PX where the food court was. I'd hit up the Popeyes. I would get spicy tenders, Cajun fries, and a Coke. It was diet, you know? Plenty of food already, but then I'd drive home. I'd hit up the gas station. I'd grab a little bag of Doritos and like Reese's cups too. I just wanted to have everything that I wanted because I could not control my impulses when I just needed to manage my emotions. Like I didn't know how else to do it. I feel pathetic admitting this, but that's just how it was. And this went on, like I said, for months at least. I'd get home, I'd gorge. Sorry, I'm still sick, by the way. And then I'd just like pass out and wake up and do it all over again. I was not taking care of myself. And it started to show. By the time I got out of the Air Force, I had gained like 50 pounds, okay? I'm 5 feet tall. And by the way, this is not me blaming anyone but myself. But yeah, I was just a mess on every single level. Now, that security that I was so happy to have during that 6 years, obviously wonderful. It could have been a real head start for anyone who had some financial sense, which was not me. All right. I had none. I didn't think of the future like really ever. It's never felt real to me. It still doesn't, as I've talked about many times. But it was just kind of like, you know, the checks were coming in every 2 weeks. And like my ADHD brain, which just like never thought of the future, was just like, yeah, like this is just life now. Like you just always have money. Like, you know what I mean? You don't have to think about it. And I think what made it worse was the fact that I never had any reason to really think about finances, at least for the first couple years. I was still on my parents' cell phone plan because I was a new airman and I wasn't married. I was living in the dorm, so I didn't have rent to pay. I didn't have a car for at least the first year. And then even when I did get one, I bought like an old car. I didn't have payments. So my paychecks were basically just shopping money. And I went shopping. Shopping was my favorite thing to do, besides eating. By the time I got out of the Air Force and moved to New York, I was 25. I was looking for a new life for obvious reasons. But the truth is that I spent all of that time that I really could have used to get ahead if I would have been smart about it. You know, I could have been saving and growing and laying a healthy foundation to launch myself into bigger and better things. But really, I just spent that time trying not to drown in basic things. And so I'd been unshackled from a military contract, but my life was still kind of more or less the same. Only now I didn't enjoy shopping anymore because I didn't feel cute in literally anything. I still couldn't cook. And anytime I did try, I was so easily overwhelmed because I didn't even have like the basics down. Like I'm telling you, like I couldn't make eggs. All right. Bad. And then even when I would like swear I was going to turn it all around, I'd spend money on groceries. But then like, you know how the ADHD brain is, like, if you're not careful, you just let those groceries like rot in the fridge, you know? And I started eating takeout for every single meal. And let me tell you what, it's probably a good thing that I didn't enjoy shopping anymore, because whatever money I spent on clothes, I now needed to spend on food. Do you have any idea how much takeout in Manhattan is? Getting it delivered? Okay, I was like Seamless's #1 customer in 2015. I also no longer had friends. Okay, I know I just complained about my experience in the Air Force, but I'll tell you what, I did have during that time good friends around me, like peers, people like in my age group, like doing the same things and like, you know, interacting with every day. Like by the time I moved to New York and started going to school, right, I'd moved there so I could use my GI Bill. I was now a 25-year-old freshman and everyone else in my class was 18, some were even 17. And obviously they were all living in the dorms and I was an adult student, so I was not. And yeah, so I stopped having a social life. And because I stopped having a social life, I stopped having any social skills. And so I became really insecure in a way that I don't think I ever had been before, because I'd go out once in a while and interact with the world and it would be awkward. And I wouldn't know if like they were judging me because of my appearance or because I'd become socially awkward or both. And my only hobby was eating. And so I obviously felt like garbage. I had no energy. But the hilarious part, like now I know so much more about nutrition. Back then I used to think I had to fuel myself for long days at school with like 2 bagel sandwiches from the deli around the corner. Yeah. Oh yeah. I was crashing all the time. I had no idea what was wrong with me. I thought it was just like getting older. Mind you, I was 26. And like I said, I rarely left the house. My only obligations were basically school. But for some reason, school wasn't easy this time around, like it was when I was in high school. In fact, I was drowning amongst my schoolwork. And listen, wouldn't have felt so bad about that had I been going to like Harvard Medical School or something. I was not. I was going to a school where like the main priority was like dance and musical theater, and I was there getting a communications degree, okay? Like I should have been cruising through it. But it did not matter how easy the work was, how much free time I had, none of that, because I could not manage myself at all. And again, I just started to feel horrible about myself, like the whiplash I had going from once being like, you know, a star student. And then even when I was, you know, working in the Air Force, okay, struggling with the work, but I was like still a social butterfly. Like now I had none of that. I felt like I couldn't handle anything. I didn't want to be seen by anybody. And so to avoid that, I just isolated myself in my apartment. And mind you, I'm paying like New York City rent. Like I'm so mad at myself for that. But anyway, it finally all came to a head one day. I was sitting in a very basic math class, but I had no idea what was going on. And I was behind in all my other classes, which I did understand, but I just, you know, was behind in the work because what's new. And I had just started a new job, which was stressing me out, but I wasn't going to get paid from that job before my rent was due. And I just had a breakdown. I just had a breakdown in class. I started crying. I excused myself and I immediately went to the like mental health office on campus. And you know what's crazy about that? I still wouldn't get diagnosed with ADHD for like another 5 years. Now, I don't bring all this up so that you feel bad for me, okay? I'm fine. I've obviously pulled myself together a lot more. Well, I was going to say I've obviously pulled myself together a lot more since then, but then I think about how like the last 5 videos I've done have been in this bathrobe, so maybe it doesn't look like that. But anyway, it's obviously still a struggle. And again, it's hard to look back and know that I spent my 20s living in Florida. Italy and New York City, and I should have been having a blast. Hang on one second. Baby, I'm still filming, but I'm almost done. Okay, love you, bye. Where was I? And I should have been having a blast, okay? But I wasn't, because I was drowning in basic everyday activities that most people think are easy. But you know, when you struggle to manage your impulsivity, when you can never focus on anything, when you can't stick to any of your routines, when you try 10 different creative endeavors, you know, blogging, YouTubing, a music career, and you fail at all of them, I wouldn't even say fail, but just give up because you're bored or whatever, and you don't even know why you're struggling, it can be easy to just think that you suck as a human being, you know? I know that having the meds that I have access to now would have helped tremendously, but even if I didn't get medicated, I think just knowing that I had ADHD would have helped me so much. Not that I blame myself, because you don't know what you don't know, but that's kind of why I wanted to share this video. So anyway, that is it for today. Vlogmas Day 9. I am on a roll. I'm sorry how low quality these videos have been, but I went from not uploading for 6 months to doing one every single day, so it's been interesting. But yeah, thank you for being here, and I'll see you tomorrow.